Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the M. Weena Foundation of New Jersey, the Thomas and Teresa Malarkey Foundation, the Center for Educational Outreach and Innovation at Teachers College, Columbia University, the William T. Grant Foundation, and from the corporate community, Rhoda Finn. I'm Richard Hefner, your host on The Open Mind, and our subject today, an unpleasant one to be sure, is also vitally important to any society that considers itself enlightened and civilized, namely what we choose to learn and then what we do about the minds of killers. My guest today is psychiatrist Dorothy Ottnow Lewis, a professor at New York University's School of Medicine and at Yale University's Child Studies Center. In her compelling new book, Guilty by Reason of Insanity, this learned psychiatrist specifically sets out to explore the minds of killers. And I wonder if she would tell us precisely what she means her title to indicate about ourselves and about crime and punishment in America. After all, the traditional expression is not guilty by reason of insanity. So, Dr. Lewis, why guilty by reason of insanity?
The title has many nuances, I think, but taken at face value, the individuals that I write about are extraordinarily ill, and some are brain damaged, some are psychotic, and because, in great measure, because of their psychoses and the way they were raised, they committed incredibly violent acts and were found guilty, although in many cases attempts were made to plea not guilty by reason of insanity, but they were found guilty. And they did what they did, at least in great measure, because of what I think any psychiatrist would call insanity. Unfortunately, the law has a different definition for insanity, and hence they were not thought to fall under the legal definition of insanity.
Why are you concerned about this matter of guilty because of insanity?
In addition to the moral issues of no civilized nation throughout history has executed its insane. So from a moral point of view, I think it's extremely important. But I'm interested in studying violence because, to my mind, it is the major health issue in our country. I think it's the second, homicide is the second major cause of death in children between, I think, about 15 and 21 or 24. And it is the major cause of death in older black adolescents, so that we really better find out why we're so violent.
Now, you say that no nation, and I made note of that, and if I can find the right reference to the way you say it, you say on page 251 that civilized societies exonerate the insane from guilt.
Yes.
And that's the counterpart of what you said. Why is this a particular concern of yours? Do you want the not guilty because of insanity to prevail? Is that what you want, so that there will not be punishment that will be the equivalent of you're saying this person is guilty of a horrendous crime? After all, you make the point in your book that you haven't found an individual guilty of horrendous murders, a serial killer, you could identify as without mental illness.
Right.
So essentially,
for lack of a better word, as playing with a full day.
Okay.
Yes.
So essentially, you're saying what? No punishment?
No, absolutely not. Well, what I'm saying is you don't kill people who, because of an illness, act in an uncontrollable way. I'm also saying you don't let them free. They can be very, very, very dangerous, so that sometimes people will mistake the findings of our studies for a plea to say, well, just let these people go. You can't. They are very dangerous. I mean, I see some of the most violent people in the world, I guess. However, a civilized country and a moral country does not kill individuals who, because of brain dysfunction or because of psychosis and because of a violent, abusive upbringing, act in violent ways. I think that you or I, had we been raised so, and if we had those vulnerabilities, that we would be capable of doing very similar things.
Why do we execute people?
There's a difference between why we do and why we say we do. I think politicians say that they do it in order to deter others. However, it's well known that that capital punishment is not a deterrent. Indeed, there have been studies that have been done that indicate that after an execution, murder goes up for a short period of time. So clearly, we're not really deterring anyone. I think people are very aggressive, and people also are angry and horrified and want vengeance, which is understandable. And I think that's why we do that.
We needn't be biblical and say, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, but why, understanding as you do the need, the real public need for vengeance, why do you not want to let that outlet prevail? And it is an outlet.
I don't think that does any good. Do you know...
it doesn't do good?
Oh, it used to be thought in psychiatry, in, I guess, medium old-fashioned psychiatry, that if you let a patient come in, become aware of his anger and express it, they would talk about a catharsis, that then that patient was better and would go off into the sunset and behave well. But studies have shown that individuals who are encouraged to express their violence and express their aggressive instincts become more aggressive. And psychiatry, I hope, is rethinking these methods.
Then you obviously don't accept the frequent psychiatric explanation for and excuse for, explanation of, I should say, an excuse for violence in the media, in the entertainment media, as being cathartic. There are those, and I know I've heard them, trained in your profession, who maintain, as you just described it, this catharsis notion. You don't accept that? Well,
I'm not certain in every area that you can make a comparison. So that I believe that individuals who are vulnerable when they are exposed to extreme violence in the media often are encouraged to go ahead and do it themselves. And there have been incidents like that. In my own experience, in the past 6 months, I think, I have seen 2 cases, and I never believed this, by the way. I didn't believe really that the media made a big difference. But I have seen 2 cases in which kids, just prior to committing extraordinarily violent acts, listened to music that encouraged them to commit violent acts. In one, I heard the tape, and the last 8 lines of the song he was listening to before he murdered an old woman was, "Should we kill her? Yeah. Should we kill her? Yeah." And it went on 8 times. And then when I asked the boy why he did it, he said, "I don't know." He said, "I don't know what got into my head."
But you think that got into his head?
Well, he was an extremely troubled, a very abused boy. And I think that that may have been what tipped him over. Now, I think that for normal kids, it would roll off of them. I don't think that it's a very nice lyric, but it's, it's probably harmless for most people, but for very vulnerable kids, for a kid also who was prone to go into almost hypnotic states, I think that it was not a good thing.
You say for vulnerable, very vulnerable kids. This is a huge nation now. We're coming up on 300 million people in our country. That must mean there are many, many, many very vulnerable kids. Would that be your experience?
Yes, and I think there are, with many kids, first of all, with our mental health system such that we really deny treatment to a great many very, very sick people, and very sick people who are trying to raise children, and with our increasing drug problems, and parents who are giving birth to children who have brain dysfunction because the parent was taking drugs during the pregnancy. I think that we are getting more and more abused, uncared for children, and I think it's alarming.
Then if one puts together, in terms of what you've said, a larger and larger population, and a larger and larger population of abused children, and an unwillingness to see that the scale can be tipped by popular entertainment, whether you're talking about music or film or television or whatever, you're talking about a future that's going to contain many more instances of violence.
You know, I think we do something else that's even more stupid. That I think that our violent movies, our violent TV, our violent lyrics will affect some vulnerable people, but by and large will not. But our...
Well, excuse me,
yes.
Can I stop you?
Yes,
what
sure.
What do you mean, by and large, will not? Will not for the population,
for
by
the
and
ordinary
large.
population, by and large. I think you and I have seen innumerable violent films and violent things on television, and most kids don't act on this.
Yes, but you've just said that the abused population is getting larger and larger.
I think so, yes. And statistics suggest that it is. But we're doing something else that is idiotic. May I tell you what we're doing that's idiotic, that is not
Please.
in the book, or that I think is idiotic? We are so interested in punishment that we really don't give a damn what we know about how to create a violent person. Now, we know that, scientifically we know, if you keep an animal or a person in a small enclosed place, you will lower serotonin in the brain, you will make that animal or person more violent. If you surround the person by other people of whom he's afraid, other violent people, or the animal. By the way, animals raised with more aggressive parents than their biological parents, animals will become more violent. If you surround an animal or a person with other violent people and you make that person more and more paranoid, you will create a violent individual. And most of all, if you inflict pain on an animal or on a person, you will, just discomfort will create violence, and pain will create more violence. And how do we design our prisons? Exactly that way. And I think, again, it's because of the wish for vengeance. And you hear people say, take away the TV from prisoners. Take away the athletics. Take away the education from prisoners. Well, then you have in your prisons a laboratory for violence.
But that's not stupidity, is it? I mean, it isn't...
You don't think so?
Well, what I meant is that the proper word? You say basic to this is the need, the desire for vengeance.
I think so.
That's not stupidity. That's illness, isn't it?
Well, no. I think human nature is imperfect, and that we're an incredibly aggressive animal, especially you guys. you are 9 times
Well,
as
think of our
violent as we.
serotonin.
Well, think of your testosterone.
Right.
And
I don't want to think about that. Please, not at 73.
But
go ahead.
testosterone, there's some very interesting studies that have been done, animal studies. For example, rats in utero. If you have a female rat in utero and that rat is placed in the placenta between 2 males in that litter, that female is masculinized. The brain of that mouse or rat is masculinized, and that female is a more aggressive female than the ones who are between 2 females. So it's a very, very interesting phenomenon.
Now, tell me, what does that say, in your opinion, about feminism and the result of the feminist movement?
What precisely are you asking?
As Rex Harrison said, if only a woman could be more like a man. What you're talking about then is an increasing level of violence in our society, women as well as men.
It's true, actually. You raise a very interesting point, because I believe that violence among women is rising more rapidly than among men, or it was in the past 5 years or so. And I think we make a terrible mistake by trying to be fighter pilots and trying to be just as aggressive as you guys. I think that, on the other hand, we're now appreciating that there is a feminine intelligence. It may be less abstract, it may not be as mathematical, however, it has to do with picking up cues between people, with empathy, and I think we should capitalize on that instead of copying you.
I'll go along with that. I don't want you copying me, not by any means. But I want to get back to this notion of your use of the concept of this is pretty damn stupid, what we do. It must serve some function. You're the psychiatrist.
Why?
You know we don't do anything for no reason. What is the reason we act in a way that is so counterproductive, that is so destructive?
I suspect, I once started to write an article or a chapter. It's called Chapters Never Finished or Articles Never Written, saying, I think the mob must be involved in building prisons because there is some very powerful force in this country that economically has found it a good thing to incarcerate people and build prisons. And I think that there is some force politically that is taking advantage of our wish for vengeance.
Well, look, I hear you. You're saying that our worst enemies would have us do what we are doing with prisoners.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Absolutely. Because you let them out more dangerous than they came in.
Right, but we're doing it, and I think there must be some need satisfied, some function that kind of act, and it can't be stupidity. It can't be stupidity. What is it? And if you say vengeance, the need for vengeance, then I have to ask you...
You don't think it's economic also in many ways? That there...
You mean the business about the mob?
Well, the business of incarceration. For example, it's become private now. Did you know that? There are now private prisons, so that people are attempting to make a living on incarcerating
Yes, but
people.
Dr. Lewis, you came to the conclusions you've come to long before the age of privatization. Is that fair?
Yes.
Long before you could really say, hey, look, now they're making a buck out of this stupidity. And all I'm asking is whether, in order to deal with this problem, and you describe an intensely real and destructive problem in terms of our attitudes, in order to deal with it, don't we have to figure out a little better what human motivations are involved here and see if we can satisfy them some other way?
Absolutely.
Or say, there's no way of satisfying that need for revenge, and what we're doing is perhaps, with some limitations, the best we can do, being these poor benighted human beings.
Oh, I think that we're a very young society. the United States, I mean, compare it to Europe. Europe doesn't have a death penalty now. And we're slowly evolving. And the Supreme Court, I think, has talked about evolving standards of decency. Mm-hmm. And, well, our work on, we did, I think, the only study ever done on juveniles sentenced to death. And ours is one of the only countries in the world that sentences juveniles, 16-year-olds, to death. But the Supreme Court, based at least in part on our studies, I'm sure based on other things, and on evolving standards of decency, has raised that. So now from 15, when our study was done, to 16. And I think that we're just young, and what I try to do is sort of sit back and just tell the facts, just tell the news. And in this book, I bring it to life, because most of my studies were done statistically and were valid, but certainly this makes it human. And I think that maybe books like this will force people to think, who are these serial killers, for example?
Well, this is the question, of course, that I want you to address yourself to now. Who are they? What are they? What has happened to them? You make much of a kind of determinism here. You're saying, under this set of circumstances, how could you expect anything other than a serial killer?
Or, yes, I think.
What are the circumstances?
There's no single factor that creates a violent person. For example, brain damage alone or brain dysfunction alone does not. What brain damage does is it increases emotional lability, impulsiveness, poor judgment, but most brain damaged people are not violent. And psychosis, even paranoia, even paranoid schizophrenia, does not usually create violence. Most people with this disorder are not violent. And probably abuse alone does not create a grotesquely violent individual. However, when you put these together, brain dysfunction, a tendency to paranoia, and early ongoing horrendous abuse and violence, you get a recipe for violence.
In the studies you have conducted, in terms of the persons you have visited on death row,
yes,
have these been the common denominators?
Absolutely. In fact, when we reported our study, I forget whether it was the one of the juveniles or the adults condemned to death, but the data on the parents and on the hideous abuse, which, by the way, the children and the adults did not remember. This was gleaned from other sources. But when we looked at that, there was so much that we did a separate paper on it, and we called it filicidal abuse in the histories of death row inmates, because we found that about, I think, half of the inmates had parents who had tried to kill them. We had 2 inmates where parents had held them out of the window of moving cars as young children or infants. I mean, that is extraordinary. And if it happened to you or to me, I question whether we would be law-abiding.
Do you think, and I don't mean to make a joke of this by any means, but do you think parallel or similar things did happen to those people who had stood outside the jail and yelled, "Burn Bundy, burn Bundy, burn Bundy"?
I don't know. That I've never evaluated them, and I'm sure they wouldn't permit it. But I guess the closest I came, and that I do
the executioner.
Have in the book, is, I think I end the book with a chapter on, I had the dubious distinction, I guess, of interviewing at great length an executioner. And the reason that I did is I wanted to find someone who killed for a living, because people said, come on, Dorothy, hitmen, other people, and possible, maybe perfectly normal people just trying to make an honest buck. And so I went down and I visited this man in his trailer. And over the course of a whole evening of talking and drinking beer and whatever, I learned that he himself had been extraordinarily violent, that he had been horribly abused by his family, and also that his thinking was distorted and illogical. And in fact, I quote much of that chapter is verbatim from the interview with him, because you couldn't even follow what he was saying. He would say things like, "I know nothing about the people that I execute," and then he would show me a scrapbook in detail about each person he had executed. So here I thought that I was going to see the person, just the cool killer.
Finally.
He was just like the people whom he executed.
We have a minute left, perhaps, maybe a little more. Do you think we're changing in this regard from guilty by reason of insanity? I have the feeling we're getting more and more deeply into that morass that you decry. What do you think?
I think that we're going through a phase now. I hope that it's just a dip, because for a period of time in this country, for about 10 years, there were no executions. And I guess there's a backward and forward movement in society, and I like to think that by virtue of doing this kind of research, and others are doing research on the brain and neurochemistry, that we're moving toward a more civilized way of handling very aggressive individuals, so that I see this as a blip.
I'm glad you do, because reading guilty by reason of insanity is a fascinating experience, to be sure, and one ends up awfully, awfully depressed. Thank you for relieving my depression. Thank
Pleasure.
you for joining me today on The Open Mind, Dr. Lewis.
Pleasure.
And thanks, too, to you in the audience. I hope you join us again next time. And if you would like a transcript of today's program, please send $4 in check or money order to The Open Mind, P.O. Box 7977, FDR Station, New York, New York 10150. Meanwhile, as an old friend used to say, good night and good luck. Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the M. Weena Foundation of New Jersey, the Thomas and Teresa Malarkey Foundation, the Center for Educational Outreach and Innovation at Teachers College, Columbia University, the William T. Grant Foundation, and from the corporate community, Rhoda Finn.